There are words that kill, not the body, the soul. Words that seem smaller, that seem harmless, that even seem like love disguised as concern. But they systematically destroy a child's ability to believe in themselves. Carl Jung, one of the greatest psychologists in history, deeply studied how narcissistic mothers use language as a weapon. And what he discovered is deeply disturbing. You don't need to hit a child to destroy them. You just need to speak. You just need to repeat certain phrases. You just need to plant certain seeds in the mind of someone who doesn't yet have defenses. Recent neuroscience research confirms what Jung intuited decades ago. Verbal abuse activates the same brain areas as physical violence. A child's brain doesn't distinguish between a slap and a destructive phrase. The pain is the same. The damage is the same. The difference is that slaps leave visible marks. Words leave invisible marks. And invisible marks are much harder to heal. Today, I'm going to reveal the 7 phrases that narcissistic mothers use to destroy their children's self-confidence. I'm going to explain exactly how each of these phrases works psychologically. And I'm going to show you what Jung discovered about how to undo this programming. If you recognize these phrases, pay attention until the end. Because the most important revelation comes in the last minutes. Before we start, I need to explain something fundamental. Jung identified what he called the devouring mother. It's an archetype, a universal form of maternal behavior that appears in all cultures, in all times. The devouring mother isn't necessarily a bad person. Frequently, she genuinely believes she's helping, genuinely believes she's protecting, genuinely believes she's preparing the child for the world. But what she really does is consume the child psychologically. She devours their individuality, their autonomy, their confidence, and she uses words as the instrument of this devouring. Jung observed that this archetype arises from a deep-seated fear, the fear of being alone, the fear of being abandoned, the fear of losing control. And to combat these fears, the mother devours her children, keeps them dependent, keeps them small, keeps them unable to live without her, and words are her most effective instrument. The first phrase is perhaps the most devastating. You'll never amount to anything. It seems simple. It's just 5 words. But when repeated by someone in whom the child trusts completely, these words become a self-fulfilling prophecy. The child hears it once, 10 times, and 100 times. Every time they try something new. Every time they dream big. Every time they dare to imagine a different future. And little by little, the child stops trying. Not because they don't want to, but because they've internalized that it's no use. The mother's voice becomes their own voice. And that voice repeats their whole life, you'll never amount to anything. And let me tell you about Emily. Emily was 8 years old when she wanted to learn to play the piano. Her mother looked at her and said, you'll never amount to anything. Your hands are clumsy. Music isn't for you. Emily didn't insist. She buried the desire. At 15, Emily wanted to do theater at school. Her mother said, you'll never amount to anything. You don't have stage presence. You don't know how to express yourself. Emily didn't insist. She buried the desire. At 22, Emily had a business idea. Her mother said, you'll never amount to anything. You don't know how to handle money. You'll lose everything. Emily didn't insist. She buried the desire. At 40 years old, Emily was in therapy. I asked her, what would you like to do if you could do anything? She didn't know how to answer. She had spent her whole life burying desires. There wasn't a single one left alive. Jung called this the assassination of the desire function. When a child is systematically discouraged from wanting, they stop wanting. The desire dies. And without desire, there is no life. There is only survival. The second phrase is even more insidious. I do everything for you, and this is how you treat me? This phrase does something terrible. It transforms the child into an eternal debtor, transforms love into a transaction, transforms existence into debt. The child learns that every breath they take has been paid for by the mother. Every meal was paid for. Every item of clothing was paid for. and the debt can never be repaid, because the debt is their very existence. This creates what Jung called narcissistic guilt, a guilt that has no object, a guilt that has no cause, a guilt that simply exists because you exist. Adults who grew up hearing this phrase feel guilty all the time. Guilt for having needs, guilt for asking for something, guilt for not doing enough for others, guilt for existing. And the worst part is that they can't identify the source of the guilt. It seems like they were born guilty. It seems like guilt is part of them, but it isn't. It was planted. Michael was 35 years old when he realized the pattern. He worked 70 hours a week, never took vacations, never said no to anyone, and still felt like he wasn't doing enough. Michael's mother used this phrase constantly. "I do everything for you. I sacrifice everything. And this is how you treat me?" Michael spent his life trying to pay a debt that didn't exist, and the debt only grew. Because the more he did, the more his mother demanded. It was a bottomless pit. In therapy, Michael needed to learn something fundamental, that he didn't ask to be born, that being cared for in childhood isn't a favor, it's the obligation of parents, that existing doesn't create debt. It was one of the most difficult processes, because the guilt was ingrained. Every time Michael tried to set boundaries, the guilt attacked. The mother's voice attacked. "You're ungrateful. You're selfish. I did everything for you." But little by little, Michael learned to tolerate the guilt, learned that the voice wasn't his, it was his mother's, and he could choose not to obey. The third phrase sounds like love, but it's poison. "No one will ever love you like I love you." This phrase does something perverse. It isolates the child emotionally. It programs the child not to trust anyone besides the mother. It creates absolute dependence. Because if no one will ever love like the mother loves, then the child cannot seek love elsewhere. Then the child needs to stay, needs to depend, needs to be small forever. Jung identified this as a form of psychic possession. The mother possesses the child and uses this possession to prevent the child from individuating, from becoming a separate person, from living their own life. Adults who grew up hearing this phrase have destroyed relationships. They sabotage genuine connections because part of them believes that true love only exists with the mother. Any other love is inferior. Any other love is a substitute, or worse. They seek partners who replicate the dynamic with the mother. Controlling partners, partners who use love as a bargaining chip, partners who make you feel like they're essential for your survival. Emily was 42 years old and had 3 failed marriages. All 3 husbands were controlling. All 3 used love as a weapon. And all 3 made Emily feel like she couldn't survive alone. In therapy, Emily discovered she was repeating patterns from her mother. She chose men who made her feel the same way her mother did. Dependent, incapable, small. Her mother's phrase still echoed in her mind. "No one will love you like I do." And Emily unconsciously confirmed this by choosing people incapable of loving her truly. Emily's healing came when she managed to be alone, when she learned she didn't need anyone to survive, when she discovered that true love doesn't create dependence, it creates freedom. The fourth phrase directly attacks your identity. "You're just like your father," or "You're just like your grandmother," or anyone else the mother despises. This phrase does something subtle but devastating. It tells the child they aren't themselves. They're just a copy of someone despicable. They carry bad genes. They're condemned to repeat the mistakes of others. Carl Jung wrote extensively about how parental projections destroy a child's identity. When a mother looks at her daughter and sees the father, the daughter ceases to exist. She becomes a projection screen. She carries guilt that isn't hers. She pays for sins she didn't commit. And the child internalizes this. She starts to see herself as defective. She starts to see herself as repeating patterns. She loses track of who she really is. Michelle grew up hearing she was just like her father, the father her mother hated, the father who had abandoned the family, the father who was weak, cowardly, selfish. According to her mother, Michelle spent her life fighting ghosts. Every time she felt like doing something for herself, the voice said, "You're just like him." Selfish. Every time she wanted to rest, the voice said, "Weak, just like him." Every time she set boundaries, the voice said, "Cowardly, just like him." Michelle never knew her real father. She only knew her mother's version and lived 50 years fighting against that version, trying to prove she was different, trying not to be her father. In therapy, Michelle needed to separate things. She needed to understand that her mother's view of her father was distorted. She needed to get to know the real father through other sources, and she needed mostly to separate herself from her father. She wasn't him. She was her, with her own qualities, her own flaws, her own path. Her mother's projection wasn't truth. It was poison. The fifth phrase uses shame as a weapon. You should be ashamed. Shame is different from guilt. Guilt says, "I did something wrong." Shame says, "I am something wrong." Guilt can be repaired. Shame is permanent. When a mother uses shame systematically, she isn't correcting behavior. She's destroying identity. She's teaching the child that they're fundamentally defective, not something they did, but them. Carl Jung identified shame as one of the most destructive forces in the psyche. It goes to the core of being. It attacks the right to exist. It says, "You shouldn't be who you are." Children who grow up with chronic shame develop what Carl Jung called a hidden self. They hide who they really are, because who they really are is shameful. So they create a mask, a persona, an acceptable version. And they spend their lives living through this mask, never being true, never being authentic, always afraid that someone will discover who they really are underneath. Ashley was 38 years old and had never had a real intimate relationship. She had relationships, but she never let anyone get close, never showed vulnerability, never said what she really felt. Ashley's mother used shame as the primary tool of control. "You should be ashamed of crying like that. You should be ashamed of asking for that. You should be ashamed of existing like this." Ashley learned to hide everything, her feelings, her desires, her fears, her needs, because everything was a reason for shame. In therapy, Ashley needed to learn to show, slowly, with fear, but show. First to the therapist, then to close friends, then to a partner. And she discovered that she didn't die. She discovered that people didn't run away. She discovered that shame was a lie. She wasn't defective. She was human. And humans have needs. And that isn't shameful. It's natural. The sixth phrase is perhaps the most common. "I only say this because I care about you." This phrase is the perfect mask. It allows the mother to say any cruelty and still seem loving. It allows her to destroy and seem like she's protecting. It allows her to attack and seem like she's caring. And the child can't defend themselves. How can you defend yourself from someone who's caring about you? How can you complain about someone who only wants what's best for you? This creates devastating confusion. The child learns that love comes with pain, that care comes with criticism, that protection comes with attack. And in adulthood, this person seeks relationships that replicate this pattern. They seek partners who hurt in the name of love. They seek bosses who humiliate in the name of development. They seek friends who criticize in the name of honesty, because to them, this is love. It's the only form of love they know. David was 45 years old and had a marriage that seemed to work. His wife criticized everything he did, how he dressed, how he spoke, how he ate, how he breathed. But David thought it was normal. His wife just cared about him. She wanted him to be better. She wanted to help. It was only when his teenage daughter started showing symptoms of anxiety that David realized. His daughter was afraid of everything, afraid of making mistakes, afraid of being judged, afraid of existing. And David saw that he was repeating the pattern. His wife was doing to his daughter what David's mother had done to him, criticizing in the name of love, destroying in the name of concern. It was the turning point. David couldn't change his own past, but he could change his daughter's future. And he started to confront, to say that concern doesn't justify cruelty, that love shouldn't hurt. The marriage didn't survive, but his daughter did. The seventh phrase is the final blow. You're too sensitive. You're too dramatic. You exaggerate everything. This phrase does something that Jung considered particularly destructive. It invalidates the child's perception. It says that what the child feels isn't real. It says that the child's pain is invented. It says that the child's experience is a lie. This is called gaslighting. It's a form of psychological abuse that makes the person doubt their own sanity. When a child is repeatedly told that their emotions are exaggerated, they stop trusting themselves. They stop trusting what they feel. Stop trusting your own perceptions. And this distrust lasts a lifetime. Adults who grew up being emotionally invalidated often don't know what they feel. They sense something, but immediately doubt it. Am I overreacting? Is this real? Am I being too dramatic? And this makes them vulnerable, because when you don't trust your own perception, you need to trust the perception of others. And others can manipulate you. Ashley was the easiest person to manipulate I've ever met in my practice. Anyone could convince her of anything, because Ashley didn't trust herself. Ashley's mother used constant invalidation. You're not hungry. You just ate. You're not tired. You haven't done anything. You're not sad. You have no reason to be. Ashley learned that her perception was wrong. Always. So she stopped listening to herself and started listening to others, anyone else, in therapy. Ashley needed to relearn how to trust. She needed to go back to basics. When you feel hungry, you are hungry. When you feel tired, you are tired. When you feel sadness, the sadness is real. It sounds simple, but for Ashley, it was revolutionary. For the first time in her life, she had permission to trust her own experience. There's something else I need to explain about these 7 phrases. They rarely appear alone. Narcissistic mothers use combinations. One week it's, you'll never amount to anything. The next, it's, I do everything for you. On the same day, it could be, no one will ever love you like I do. And you're too sensitive. And this combination is what creates total destruction, because it attacks from all sides. It attacks ability. It attacks identity. It attacks emotions. It attacks relationships. It leaves nothing intact. Jung observed that narcissistic mothers instinctively know where to attack. They find the weak spots, the vulnerabilities, and concentrate fire on those points. If the child is sensitive, the phrase, you're too sensitive, will be repeated until the sensitivity becomes a source of shame. If the child is ambitious, you'll never amount to anything will be hammered until the ambition dies. If the child values love, no one will ever love you like I do, will be used to create dependency. It's a form of psychological warfare. It's not accidental. It's not innocent. It's strategic. Even if the mother isn't consciously aware of doing it, because narcissistic mothers operate on autopilot. They repeat what they received. They use the same weapons that were used against them, and the cycle continues. There's a case I haven't mentioned yet, and it's perhaps the most important. Olivia was 55 years old when she finally confronted her mother. After 3 years of therapy, after a lot of internal work, after gathering the courage, the mother was 82 years old, frail, dependent, very different from the woman who had terrorized Olivia throughout her childhood. Olivia sat in front of her mother and said, "You destroyed me, with your words, with your criticisms, with your inability to see me as a person separate from you." The mother looked at Olivia and said, "I only did what my mother did to me. I didn't know how to do anything different." And for the first time, Olivia saw her mother as a person, not as a monster, as a wounded person who wounded, as a victim who became a perpetrator, as a link in a chain of pain that crossed generations. This doesn't excuse it. This doesn't erase the damage. This doesn't justify the destruction. But it helps to understand. And understanding helps to break the cycle. Because when you see that your mother was a victim before being a perpetrator, you can choose not to perpetuate. You can choose to do differently. You can choose to be the link that breaks the chain. Olivia didn't forgive her mother that day. Forgiveness takes time, maybe a lifetime. Maybe it never comes completely. But Olivia did something more important. She separated herself, psychologically, finally. After 55 years, she saw that her mother's voice wasn't her voice. She saw that her mother's phrases weren't true. She saw that her mother was a broken person who broke other people. And Olivia chose not to be like that, chose to speak differently with her own children, chose to create a new lineage, a lineage of words that heal, not that destroy. There's another aspect that Carl Jung emphasized. Destructive phrases don't only affect self-confidence, they affect the entire structure of the personality. When a child grows up hearing that they'll never amount to anything, they develop a fear of trying. When they grow up hearing that they owe everything to their parents, they develop an inability to receive. When they grow up hearing that they're too sensitive, they develop a disconnection from their own emotions. Each phrase creates a specific pattern of defense, and these patterns become the personality. The person no longer knows where they end and where the defense begins. Carl Jung called this identification with the persona. The mask merges with the face. The defense merges with the identity. And the person loses track of who they really are underneath all of that. Recovering the true self requires deconstructing these defenses, one by one, layer by layer. It's scary, because when you remove the defenses, you become vulnerable, exposed, without protection. But it's the only way to find who you really are, the being that existed before the destructive words, the child who was born whole, before the phrases started to fragment. That child still exists. It's in there, waiting, protected by the shadow, hidden from the words that kill. And when you find it, when you rescue it, when you allow it to finally exist, something extraordinary happens. Self-confidence returns. Not the false confidence of the defenses, the true confidence, the one that comes from knowing who you are, from accepting who you are, from existing without needing to prove anything to anyone. Now that you know the 7 phrases, I need to explain how they work together. None of these phrases alone would destroy someone. What destroys is the repetition. It's the accumulation, and the fact that it comes from someone in whom the child trusts absolutely. Carl Jung explained that children live in a state of mystical participation with their parents. There's no separation. What the mother says is absolute truth. It cannot be questioned. It cannot be filtered. It cannot be rejected. So each phrase enters directly into the psyche, without filter, without protection, without defense. And there it stays, running, repeating, for decades. And this is the worst part. These phrases become the person's own voice. They no longer hear their mother saying it. They hear themselves. And they don't recognize that this voice was implanted. The internal critical voice that so many people carry wasn't born from nothing. It was built, phrase by phrase, word by word, by someone who should have protected, but chose to destroy. So how do you undo this? Carl Jung offered a path, and it begins with recognition. The first step is to identify the voice. When you hear, "You'll never amount to anything," stop and ask, whose voice is this? When you feel guilty for existing, stop and ask yourself, is this guilt mine, or was it planted? This seems simple, but it's extraordinarily difficult, because the voice disguises itself. It seems to be your own. It seems to be reason. It seems to be reality. But it's not. It's an echo. It's repetition. It's programming. The second step is what Carl Jung called confrontation with the shadow. All the parts of you that were attacked by these phrases are in the shadow. The part that wanted to try new things. The part that wanted to be loved without having to earn it. The part that felt genuine emotions. All of that was banished. Reclaiming those parts takes courage. It demands going against the programming. It demands doing exactly what the voice tells you not to do. Does the voice say you're going to fail? Try anyway. Does the voice say you're too dramatic? Feel anyway. Does the voice say no one will ever love you? Seek love anyway. Every time you disobey the voice, it weakens. And every time it weakens, you get stronger. The third step is reparenting yourself. You can't change the past. You can't change your mother. You can't erase the phrases you heard. But you can become the parent you needed to have. When the voice attacks, you can respond. Not with your mother's voice, with your own voice, with a new voice, a voice that says, you can try, you have value, you deserve love. Your emotions are real. In the beginning, it seems false, it seems forced, it seems like a lie. But with repetition, the new voice gains strength, and the old voice weakens. And there comes a moment when the new voice becomes stronger than the old one. At that moment, you are free. Not because your mother's words disappeared, because you created new words, your words, words that heal instead of destroy. The fourth step is conscious choice. Carl Jung emphasized that insight isn't enough. You can understand all of this intellectually and still be dominated by the programming. The real change comes from action, from different choices, from new behaviors. This means choosing not to repeat the phrases with your own children, even when the old voice wants to come out of your mouth, even when it seems like it would be easier, even when the anxiety tells you that you need to control. It means choosing relationships where you are valued, not where you repeat the dynamic with your mother, not where love comes mixed with destruction. It means choosing to validate your own emotions, even when the voice says you're exaggerating, even when you doubt yourself, even when it seems safer to ignore what you feel. Each different choice is an act of healing. Each different choice is an act of rebellion against the programming, against the devouring mother, against the words that tried to kill you. There's a practical exercise I recommend. Take a piece of paper. Write down the phrases you heard in childhood. All of them. The ones that hurt the most. The ones that still echo. Then, next to each phrase, write the truth. Your truth. Not your mother's truth. If you heard, you'll never succeed, right next to it, I can try, and it's by trying that I learn. If you heard, I do everything for you, right next to it, being cared for in childhood was my right, not a debt. If you heard, no one will ever love you like I do, right next to it, there are many forms of love and I deserve to be loved by whom I choose. If you heard, you're just like your father, right next to it, I am me. I am not an extension of anyone. If you heard, you should be ashamed, right next to it, my emotions are valid. I have the right to feel. If you heard, I only say it because I care, right next to it, true concern doesn't hurt, true love doesn't destroy. If you heard, you're too sensitive, right next to it, my sensitivity is my strength. I feel because I am alive. Read these new phrases every day. In the beginning, it will seem like a lie. It will seem forced. It will seem like you're deceiving yourself. But over time, the new phrases will gain strength. They'll start to compete with the old ones. They'll start to occupy space. And one day, the new phrases will be stronger. On that day, you will be free. Another important exercise is to pay attention to how you talk to yourself. During an entire day, observe your thoughts. Observe your inner voice. Observe how you treat yourself when you make a mistake, when you fail, when you can't achieve something. If the voice that appears is cruel, if the voice that appears is your mother's voice, stop, breathe, and choose to speak differently. Talk to yourself as you would talk to a dear friend. Talk to yourself as you would talk to a scared child. Talk to yourself with kindness, and this seems small, but it's revolutionary. Because every time you choose kindness instead of cruelty, you are reprogramming. You're creating new neural pathways. You're replacing the words that kill with words that heal. And here is the final revelation. The words that kill only have power as long as you don't know they exist, as long as they operate in silence, as long as they disguise themselves as truth. Now you know because now you recognize. Now you can see you, and when you see, you can choose. You can choose not to believe. You can choose to create new words. You can choose to speak differently to yourself. Words destroy, but words also heal. And you now have the choice of which words you will use, which words you will repeat, which words you will pass on to the next generation. This is the true healing, not just personal, generational. The words your mother used were probably the same ones her mother used, and her mother. Generations of women destroying their daughters with the same phrases. You can be the generation that breaks this. You can be the person who speaks differently. You can be the new voice that replaces the old voices. It's not easy. It takes time. It requires practice. It requires choice. Every day. But it is possible. If you've made it this far, you've already taken the first step. You've recognized the words. Now the choice is yours. What words will you use from now on?